Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You ever long for sleep? I do. I got to tell you, at this stage in my life, I am actually busier than any other time in my life. And the sad part about it is I'll lay in bed thinking about what I have to do the next day, just kind of ticking boxes as you go along. And look, there are some people, and I understand this, that need assistance sleeping. For a while when I worked for a long time overnights with the medical examiner in Atlanta, working that 10:30 to 6:30 shift. And I remember the doctor, he put me on sleep medication and Ambien. And the reason is that your rhythm gets all out of whack when you work overnights. Humans are not meant to do that. And I always felt like I was in a dreamlike state. You're fatigued no matter how much you sleep. And worry creeps into your mind, right? You're always worried about things, heightened sensitivity. But just think about this. If you were the biggest pop star that had ever existed in the history of pop music, and you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders, you're preparing for a tour, you've got health concerns, maybe even financial concerns. You think you might need some help sleeping? Well, we're going to talk about sleep. We're going to talk about a lack of sleep. And we're going to talk about the death of the king of pop, Michael Jackson. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, early on in your career in radio, which I'm always fascinated by Brother Dave's career in radio. It just absolutely, I don't know why it is. It's just one of those things that I've always been enamored with. So when I sit here with him, I feel like I'm kind of talking to like the superstar, right? And no, I really mean this because of what they have to do. And particularly years ago, what they had to do in that studio. And they're kind of like in this world of their own. Dave, did you spend time working nights on the radio? And if so, how long? What was that like?
I did. I worked briefly at WKIX in Raleigh, North Carolina, and worked overnight there briefly for the summer of 19 blah blah blah. And but I only did it for about 4 months. But during that time,
were bell bottoms involved in this?
No, it was after that. And
okay, just want to make sure.
But I will tell you that during that time period, I was indoctrinated into the Worms. Worms was a group of individuals that got together and indoctrinated people who worked in in particular radio, but in general, people who worked overnight. And Worms stands for Workers of Regular Midnight Shifts. And it had a whole list of things you were allowed to do, like mow your yard at 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning, things like that. And I will tell you, it does mess with your sleep when you're used to, a regular schedule, a normal nighttime sleep schedule. Working overnights can mess with your sleep a lot. Something else that can too, Joe. And I have talked about this openly. I have been sober since August 7th of 1990. But prior to that, I had a fear of insomnia. Is something that is very common among alcoholics, and it is something that affected me for a long time, and even afterwards. And I say that because this is a real thing, the not being able to go to sleep. And in this story about Michael Jackson's passing, Joe, when I was looking over the minute-by-minute breakdown of the timeline, when he went to sleep, I'm going to say this because we got a lot to go through before we get to this, but I will tell you this, that from the minute he laid down, okay, not after an hour of laying there, as you mentioned, thinking about all the things you had going on. No. With Michael Jackson at this stage in June of 2009, this 50-year-old man at 1:30 in the morning goes to lay down for bed and immediately calls out, I need something to help me sleep. I can't go to sleep. I don't know about you, but for me, I do have to lay down and put my head on the pillow and get comfortable before I determine I can't fall asleep on my own. So I'm throwing that out there that this is a real thing for Michael Jackson at this time. And he called out for help in falling asleep immediately after hitting the pillow, Joe.
Hmm. Yeah, and it is an incredible struggle for many of us. I'm still fight it, to this day.
Mhm.
Uh,
And
you
by the
know,
way,
just
guys, y'all know this. Joe does deal with insomnia and not being able to sleep. So that's really personal. And I'm not trying to hop into
yeah.
your bed here, so to
No,
speak,
no, no, no.
but I know how it affects you, and I know how you are so concerned. And you know, a lot of you notice that Joe is empathetic and sympathetic about the victims, and you cannot examine death for as long as this man did and not have it impact your life.
Yeah.
And Joe, I'm proud of how you as a man process that, and that you really do. Your first thought is always about the victim and the victim's family. And I think that's a great thing. And I do think that's part and parcel of why you do have problems sleeping sometimes.
It is, and it goes back to the diagnosis of PTSD and all that stuff that I went through all those years ago. When I wrote that memoir, and it always impacted me. And you interpret it from a sensory standpoint in a different way. How these things are kind of impacting your brain, and all those things that you see, you remember, that you have to deal with. And many times for many of us that are in this space, we'll do one of two things. We'll either go curl up and give up, or we will work at such a pace, kind of a frenetic pace. And a lot of that it's kind of self-medicating without taking medication, because you're kind of numbing yourself, to things many times. And I'm chief among sinners relative to that. And when I think about, I cannot begin to imagine the world from a logistics standpoint, from a performance standpoint, that Michael Jackson dealt with. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode was Kimmy and I actually went and saw the movie. And it's something we don't go to the movies that much anymore. I used to really enjoy it. I get so tired of, being hammered by things that are just rehashing of former stories. There's not good writing anymore. It gets really, really tedious. And of course, that's very subjective on my part, but I've just kind of pushed away. And plus, I think I've got every movie platform that's out there, that comes into mind. But there's something special about going to the theater. And we wanted, we're kids of the 60s, man. We saw Michael Jackson, performing on all the shows, when he was little, because he was like, us, to a little bit older, but, still like us. We could identify with that. I remember the Saturday morning cartoon with the Jackson 5. And of course, as you're progressing through, you see him, kind of evolve, but what really got to me, I think, about the movie, and the movie essentially ends about 87 or 88 before you really get into the dark stuff. They did not go down that road. But what really kind of got me about the movie was, I saw a lot of the inside baseball on his childhood and growing
Oh, I
up in
see.
that household with Joe Jackson.
Mhm.
And it was impactful. I really have to say, and when you have to perform at that level ever since you were a little bitty thing, which he was, man. I mean, he was young, and you got a dad that's standing there with a belt in his hand, and if you don't perform right, you're going to get the hell beat out of you. And that's what it came down to. So he's, the stage is kind of set, if you will. Okay. I know all these people out there, you can adjust your course anytime you want to. Good luck with all of that, because when that stuff is programmed into your brain, you're going down this certain trajectory. There are all kinds of pitfalls along the way. And I submit to you that the stuff the moment that he died, all that stuff, I think that it began all the way back in the 60s in Gary, Indiana. I think that he's dragging all that baggage along with him, and he's trying to numb himself any way he possibly can, and the voices just got too loud, bro.
Wow. That probably is part and parcel of what happened. I will tell you, as we break down the autopsy of Michael Jackson,
Yeah.
it is over 50 pages long.
Mm.
And the one thing that shocked me was I remember he was going through rehearsals at the Staples Center leading up
Yeah.
to this, and we were able to find a breakdown of that timeline of that day, including the songs that he sang. After his passing, he was getting ready for a world tour called This Is It. And after his passing, producers grabbed footage from his rehearsals at the Staples Center of all these different songs, and they created a movie out of it called This Is It. I happened to see that years ago, and I will tell you, Joe, I was blown away by his energy and, well, his ability, just the talent to perform. Now, this has, we're not talking about his private personal life or what he won in court or what really transpired. I thought I knew that story until I actually started researching it, and I'm just going to leave it at that. But here you go. When you're dealing with a 50-year-old man who's 5'9" and 136 pounds, immediately I'm thinking that's kind of small. That's not a big guy.
No,
And
no, not at all.
what I'm watching on stage in these rehearsals at the Staples Center as he went through for several hours the night, before he went, high energy, Joe. I mean, he is out there, he's dancing, he's singing, he's directing, he's choreographing, he's doing all of these things and very engaged. He is very, very involved. And the timeline takes it all the way through that evening at the rehearsal. Now, what happened at the rehearsal and the practicing and all that, nothing to do with his passing. It just allows a little inside peek at what his physical lifestyle was like the night before he passes away. And all I'm thinking of is these people on stage with him that are working with him, that are going through these moves, watching him and thinking that 12 hours later, he's gone. 12 hours later, he is no more.
Yeah, you think about just systemically, if he is being provided, which he is provided, obviously, with all of these just incredibly powerful medications, which we'll get into, how do you go from, 0 to 100? Because, again, going back to the movie, his nephew portrays him in the movie, and I swear that kid, and he sang all the music, he did the dance moves. That kid could go on tour right now, and amazing talent. But you see him in that dramatic representation where I didn't realize how much Jackson was involved in all the choreography. I mean, he was, they covered everything relative to that. And so that brings me to the point you just made about the rehearsals at the Staples Center. When he's in that environment and you have to be really locked in mentally, can you imagine having to do all of this, in a Bob Fosse kind of way, being up there on the stage and telling everybody where their marks are. And, oh, by the way, you have to sing and you have to dance as well. And that intensity, I can begin to understand why you would have difficulty, shutting your eyes, finding that quiet place in your brain. Unfortunately, in the world that Michael Jackson inhabited, it was very seldom he ever heard the word no. And that was his downfall. Brother Dave, for those that are not familiar, can you take us back to June 25th, June 26th of 2009, and just kind of refresh our memory as to what the timeline is here?
It is important, and that's why we talked about it briefly a minute ago, about the timeline of what was going on in his world the day of June 25th, that evening, when they rehearsed at the Staples Center, choreography for the upcoming tour and the activity that he was involved in that night on stage for hours. It wasn't just 30 minutes in and out. We're talking about hours on stage. Now, When Michael Jackson leaves, I want to make sure I have all this right, because Michael arrives home after hours of rehearsal at the Staples Center. He leaves around 11:30-ish and gets home, renting a home in the Holmby Hills, Brentwood area of Southern California. He is not living at Neverland Ranch while he is rehearsing at the Staples Center. It's important to know that because a lot of people get confused on this. Michael gets home 12:30-ish. He interacts with the staff and his children. Now, children tend to live the life of their parents, and their work schedule. And so he interacts with his children when he gets home after his rehearsals. It is late. Now we're talking about 1 o'clock in the morning. They are then taken and put to bed. Now, I said this a minute ago, and it bears repeating. Joseph Scott Morgan. At 1:30, Michael Jackson, this is 2 hours after he leaves the Staples Center, he arrives home, kisses the kids, talks to the staff. He lays down to go to sleep at 1:30 and calls out, "I need something to help me sleep. I can't sleep." Now, Joe, I mentioned this before. Most of us give it a few minutes. We lay down, we move the pillows around, get comfortable before we say, "I can't sleep."
Yeah.
At least I do. Not Michael. He calls out immediately, and that's when this is. I really hope you can explain this, because at 1:30, calls out, and Dr. Conrad Murray gives him Valium. That's 1:30 in the morning. At 2 a.m., he is given he calls out, "I can't sleep." He's given lorazepam. Am I saying that right, Joe?
Yes,
Okay.
you are.
What is that?
It's Ativan.
Thank you.
It's Ativan, and as a matter of fact, it's you will see it pushed, and when I mean pushed, I mean like people that are having like a panic attack many times, at least in the past. That's been kind of the default position for people that are like in emergency medicine, because they'll push what's referred to as a bolus of Ativan, and if you've got an IV, let's say, in place, they can take it, give you an injection, and it kind of smooths you out a little bit. But again, it's at a bit of a higher level than, say, Valium. Okay. Because Valium does have a calming effect, but you start to get into Ativan, it's got a bit more of a punch to it.
Okay. So 1:30 in the morning, lays down, asks for drugs. Dr. Murray gives him Valium. Half hour later, lorazepam. An hour goes by, and Michael Jackson again continues to call out, and this time he is given additional sedative medication. Gonna have to wait for you to break out the talk screen in the autopsy report, Joe, because I don't know exactly what he was given then at 3 o'clock, but he was administered something. 2 hours later, more lorazepam. 7:30, midazolam.
Yeah, it's Versed.
Okay, he gets that. So
yeah,
between 1:30 and 7:30, we're talking during a 6-hour period of time, Joe.
Yeah.
Valium, lorazepam twice, additional sedative medication, and then midazolam. And again, remember, this is administered because he can't sleep. Now, this has been something he's been treated before. He's gone to the hospital before because he couldn't sleep. But Joe, this is a lot of medication over a very brief period of time for a man who is 5'9" and 136 pounds.
Yeah, it's a hell of a med load to put onto somebody. And we've talked about kind of in the past on other cases, kind of the smaller you are, and it makes sense, right? When you start to put this level of medication into a system, there's only so much that your system can handle. And also, it's important to remember what you just said. This is not new territory, all right? So when he has a level of resistance, probably, because I'll give you, for instance, okay, Versed in particular. Versed, most of the time, it's a benzodiazepine, which falls into the same family as Ativan and Valium and these sorts of things. But Versed itself, this is the medication, like for any of our friends out there, if you've ever been through surgery, right? And you're going to go under anesthesia, right? When they first put your line in, when they've got you in the pre-op area, and you're laying there and you're all tense and everything. They put the line in, your IV line. Many times the nurse will come in and they'll push Versed. And the thing about Versed is that it puts you into this almost like dreamlike state, and it's like everything is cool, man. I'm ready to rock and roll, whatever you're going to do to me. Yeah, let's sally forth and get the surgery done. You're not sitting there, oh my God, they're going to give me, I'm going to go through surgery. And so Versed in and of itself is very powerful, and it's generally a precursor to the actual anesthesia. Dave, when I see this and I see this list of drugs, first off, if you're taking benzos, all right, already to kind of chill you out, this is not something that would be like recommended. Like if you were going in for surgery, right? They would say, no. You need to forego the benzos. If you're been prescribed this, you've got anxiety disorder, you're coming in the next morning, trust me, we'll take, and this is what they always say, trust me, if you've got anxiety, we're going to take care of you, when you get here. And you kind of got to lean into that, because what you're creating here is this kind of toxic stew, if you will. Okay. And everything leads back to how it impacts your ability to breathe, your ability, the ability of your heart to function correctly. And so now he's at a point in this timeline where they're pushing Versed on him. Okay. And just that and that alone would give any death investigator, any forensic pathologist pause. It would certainly give any anesthesiologist out there pause. They're taking a look at this. They're saying, my Lord, look at the drug wagon here. They're just kind of dragging behind him. And this had become kind of a norm for him, Dave.
And that's the part that is very, it's very sad, because he's under the care of a doctor, Conrad Murray. And now I want to get to what comes next after the entire night of medication, which again had been an ongoing thing. At 7:30, Dr. Conrad Murray administers more drugs, but that doesn't do it. Now, Michael Jackson has been attempting to sleep since 1:30 in the morning. He's been given a lot of drugs over several hours. I mean, and yet at 10:40 in the morning, Joe, Dr. Conrad Murray, administers Propofol. Now, before we go any further, please tell us what Propofol is, what it's used for usually, because having Propofol in a residence, not a hospital, is not only unusual, it doesn't happen.
No, it's absolutely positively bananas. All right. I cannot describe to you how out of the norm. As a matter of fact, let me kind of frame this out for you.
Okay.
Because the LA County coroner did a remarkable job. They actually went out, Dave, dig this. The chief medical examiner went out and got a consultation, deputized an anesthesiologist, okay, as, like a deputy coroner for a period of time, brought him on, and they've probably consulted with this person before. I think
Wait, hold on, back up.
Yeah.
Deputized?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Temporarily for this case.
As a deputy medical examiner.
Is that a common thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can be, particularly if you've got consultants on the staff that you regularly use.
We've
had, I know in New Orleans, we had deputy coroners that were psychiatrists, deputy coroners that were surgeons, it's in a consultation. In that way, they are working under the authority of the coroner. And so they're called to testify. They have that legitimacy, that kind of drives this thing.
Okay.
But went out and got a consult from this anesthesiologist, and listen to what I'm about to say very, very carefully, because not only did the anesthesiologist in this case, Dave, give their breakdown in their opinion relative to the meds that were administered. There was nowhere in the literature, nowhere in the scientific literature where the anesthesiologist could find a reference for people that had been administered this medication in a therapeutic setting that happened to be in a private residence. Did you know that the only reference they could find at that particular time, back in 2009, when they're working this case up, was an OD, where somebody had gotten their hands on it and used it in an inappropriate manner, in a private setting. This is something that is so abnormal relative to normal practice of administering medication. One more thing, this doctor which again is kind of a world that you and I can't really imagine. Imagine having a doctor there at your beck and call, and you're saying, I can't sleep. And literally the doctor, we're not talking about like a nurse's aide, God bless nurses' aides, CNAs. We're not talking about an LPN. We're not talking about an RN. We're talking about an MD. He's there. Hey, doc, I can't sleep. This isn't a completely different level. All right. And this guy's, I think, at best, a cardiologist. No insult to cardiologist. He ain't a surgeon, though. He's certainly not an anesthesiologist. He's got access to Propofol because he is a physician. But just because you have access to it doesn't mean that you know how to administer it. And so when the anesthesiologist saw this, and I can only imagine the wheels turning in this person's mind as they're analyzing the scene and what has been brought before them by the coroner. It's such an oddball. It just, for a moment, just take out the factor that this is Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
If this was any other case, the anesthesiologist would be there saying, oh my Lord, this is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. Who does this?
Right. Now, Propofol used to knock somebody out for a surgical procedure. I was telling Joe earlier, I had the CT myelogram done for my neck, and they were using Propofol to knock me out. They called it the magical milk, I think is what the guy told me. Big burly guy standing in front of me, Joe. He puts a towel on his chest like that, and he goes, hey man, why don't you just lay your head down? And I'm like, why? He goes, as soon as we start this, you're going to be out. He goes, I'll bet you $100 you're not going to make it to 95, counting back from 100. Well, I knew a guy that big, first of all, he knows what he's talking about. I'm not betting, I'd have lost. I got it to 97, I think, and I was gone. Just boom. And it keeps you like that until they turn it off. Right, Joe?
Yeah, it does. And it has to be administered in a very particular way, regarding from a therapeutic standpoint, because when you're in this environment and you're administered things like this, and I talked about how it impacts the lungs and the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what you have to have there? You have to have the ability to, like, at your fingertips, you have to have equipment that will aid in helping someone breathe. Okay. That wasn't there. As a matter of fact, they had an O2 canister that was there, kind of the oxygen that you see.
Mm-hmm.
Thing was empty. All right. And none of the appropriate things were around to support this drug. And I'm glad that you mentioned, what was the reference you made to milk just a second
ago?
the
magical milk is what.
Yeah, the magical milk.
Yeah.
So we've heard this over the years, haven't we?
Mm-hmm.
Because the statement that Jackson had allegedly made, and this is very insightful. He said, more milk, more milk. Now, I don't know the provenance of that statement necessarily. Okay. But first off, if you've ever been to surgery and they're administering anesthesia, okay, with Propofol, it is milk-like. It's very viscous. It's thick. when you see it, you do look at it and you think this, this looks like something I'd put over my cereal. Okay. It's very milky in appearance. And the fact that Jackson has allegedly made this comment, more milk, that gives you an idea that he is familiar, with the drug, that this is something that is in his life regularly, because he's not saying, I need to be anesthetized, I need to be put to sleep, not in a lethal manner, by the way. We're not talking about like an animal shelter here, a kill shelter. We're talking about a man that's saying, I need more milk because that's going to help me sleep. The fact that he would be so used to this, and the fact that he's using this name that's associated with this drug is kind of shocking. So when you're looking at this from an investigative standpoint and how frequently this may have been administered to him, that familiarity rings through. And it also, because, Michael Jackson on his own could not go or, have some, some person that works for him just run down to the local Walgreens or CVS and say, hey, give me a couple of vials of Propofol. All right. You're going to have a physician that does this, that facilitates this. And that's really one of the most terrifying things about this day. So, Brother Dave, we were talking about Propofol just a moment ago, and what exactly happened at 1040?
Well, and this is the part that still, to this day, I don't know the answer. I'm hoping you can shed some light on it, okay? When Dr. Conrad Murray had been administering medication, documented, since 1:30 in the morning when Michael Jackson first laid down, and now we're at 10:40 in the morning. 9 hours later, Joe, and he's now going to give him the Propofol. And this is not the first time. I mean, Propofol has become a regular part of Michael Jackson's going to sleep routine. So much so, and this comes back from information we find out later on, it was a nightly ritual almost, certainly more than 20 times a month. And the reason this hits me wrong is 10:40 in the morning after a night. Why did he wait so long instead of giving all these other drugs? And that's a lot of drugs to give one person during that time period. Why didn't he just give him the Propofol at 1:30 in the morning?
I don't know. It goes back to drug resistance, I think, Dave. And this guy, being a physician, he should have, retrospectively, woulda, coulda, shoulda.
Right.
But just at a baseline, you should have an understanding as a practicing physician, who, by the way, was licensed in the state of California.
And Texas and Nevada, Joe.
Yeah. So you've got these states that have recognized him as a practitioner, right? He should know better. He's had medical training up to the point where the state recognizes, and he's a practitioner, right? So what does that say, right? You can't necessarily judge the character of a person just because they've passed some boards or gotten licensure or whatever the case might be. But back to your point, when we think about all of the benzos that had been previously introduced into Jackson's system, first off, there's not enough time to metabolize all that stuff because it's still floating around in his system. As a matter of fact, I'll give you kind of an insight. When Jackson's autopsy is performed, they actually find bits of drugs in his stomach. Okay, so it's commingled with it's kind of I think it's like I can't remember the exact measurements off the top of my head, but there was liquid in his stomach. It's kind of a brown tan liquid, which you see many times when you open the stomach, and they're pill fragments. And yes, we can appreciate pill fragments in the stomach because they're resistant to break down. You know how we've talked about things like time release tablets and all those sorts of things. Well, there's a way that they can kind of manufacture that from a pharmacological standpoint, but there were still pill fragments in his stomach. So we know that the process of getting all of this stuff ramped up into his system had not completed yet. because
Okay.
the stuff's being absorbed through the stomach. But yet he still got these meds in his system, and these are kind of like building blocks or steps, if you will. Well, as it turns out, these are steps toward death, because he's having to deal with this particular pre-existent benzo load, and then you take propofol and you introduce that into the system as well, and it's a recipe for disaster, Dave.
Well, and that's what I don't understand, Joe, is that all this time basically wasted on other drugs,
Yeah.
making and weakening his health in the process, before administering the propofol. But one quick thing, Joe,
Yep.
Michael Jackson was injured in that Pepsi commercial shoot in the early 80s.
Yeah.
It was not covered the way it would be now. His damage was bad. His scalp was
Yeah.
very burned, and
Yep.
it caused him to take pain medication for an extended period of time, to the point where he became dependent on the pills, the medication. Would dependence on pain medication have an impact on how Valium and some of these other drugs would impact Michael Jackson at the time of his
Yeah,
death?
if you're talking about like opiate-based stuff, yeah,
Yeah.
to kind of numb the pain. And it also goes through another barrier as well, right? So when an individual has a history of taking pain meds and they know the results from that, like if I take this, I will at least momentarily feel better. All right. So I think personally that it makes you, uh, it opens up the door to other things. Like when you think about taking all these anti-anxiety medications, which benzos typically are, that door is open to you as well. And he's kind of working his way through this kind of milky existence, no pun intended, that he's been living this since the 84 thing. We also have to consider that he's got some orthopedic problems as well. I mean, let's just think about him dancing, right? He's got back problems, all the gyrations and the spinning and all that stuff that he does as a professional performer, that creates problems. Well, from a physical standpoint, where you're going to be in pain. I'm not saying that he's like an NFL player, but we all know that with everybody that's engaged in any kind of physical activity, and you do it for a protracted time, your joints, everything else is going to be impacted by that. It's just to what degree. So, and this is kind of, it's kind of this sad story that you continue to hear about people in entertainment. And it's not a news story, right?
No.
There are very few people, and Dave, you've been around more famous people than I certainly have, particularly the music industry and all that. And I can bet you dollars to donuts, most of these people don't have what used to be called, you have a lot of people around you that are called yes men, right? Yeah. I'll take care of that. I'll make that happen. I'll make this happen, that sort of thing. We just want to keep you happy and all that sort of thing. You got very few people that ever say no to you, right?
Well,
And so when you're on this trajectory, man, it's lethal, dude.
yeah, and sadly, that had been Michael Jackson's life. The only person that ever told him no was Joe, his dad, and Joe was not there anymore. Michael is making his own calls, and Dr. Conrad Murray, as a doctor, should have been watching out for his patient. But let's get to this. The propofol at 1040. Now, according to Dr. Conrad Murray, he remained in the bedroom from 1040 to 1150. This is an important time period, Joe. And it is the central focus of what became part of the charging documents against Conrad Murray. A medical emergency, 911, was called around 11:50 a.m. So from 10:40 to 11:50 a.m., Michael Jackson is put under with propofol. At 11:50, Conrad Murray notices Michael Jackson is no longer breathing on his own. He calls 911. CPR efforts begin right away. Staff members are summoned. I mean, everything happens. 911 people arrive, and paramedics on scene make a number of observances. And when Michael Jackson is found at 12:26 p.m., He's in cardiac arrest. Advanced life-saving measures are taken, which, what would that be, Joe? For a
Oh
man
yeah,
found in this condition?
yeah. So they pushed. I know, for instance, epinephrine, which is a stimulant, to try to get his heart going once again. They've gone in through at one point in time. They've gone in through his femoral artery and inserted a balloon into his aorta, which is the major blood supply vessel in the body. It runs right down our midline. And again, that again is for the purposes of trying to breathe life back into him. He's got evidence of resuscitation. He's got several fractured ribs where they were actually doing compressions. That's something that you commonly see. So there were these, as they refer to them, heroic measures that were being taken to try to revitalize him in some way. And they, when you have, again, I go back to this idea of this toxic soup that he's got in his system. It's really hard, to defeat that on any level. Some people had said, well, he's 50 years old. He had a heart attack and died. Well, 50 years old. Yeah, if you've got some kind of predisposition in your family where you've got history of severe atherosclerosis, that sort of thing, maybe you've got a family history of heart problems. That wasn't the case here. When they, some people said they just merely want to say, well, he had a heart attack and died. That's not the case here. Yeah, his heart stopped beating, but it stopped beating because of all the meds that he had on board. Dave, his coronary vessels, when they did the dissection on his heart, were clean. Okay. He had no occlusion. And if there were, they were just like what are called just these mural, like a mural on the wall, streaks on the coronary vessels. Even when they opened his aorta, he just had these kind of streaks on there of, like cholesterol buildup that's there, atherosclerosis that's there, but nothing that would say, okay, he had a blockage in his heart. So immediately you can check that off the list. Now the lungs are a little bit heavy, which you expect. If you're talking about these kind of medications, they make the lungs heavy. He's got a history of pneumonia as well. And I had a lot of questions about that because if you're predisposed to pneumonia, and many of us that have had pneumonia, you realize that once you've had it, it's easier for you to get it again. Okay. And he has had pneumonia in the past. And a lot of people get pneumonia, but I'm just saying that in and of itself, because they do make note of that in the autopsy, that there's evidence that he has had pneumonia, that he has pneumonia. He's got bronchitis as well. That's impacting his ability to breathe. And then all of a sudden, you take these bronchial problems that he has, and these medications are like a bucket of gasoline that you're throwing on this fire that's already pre-existent, in his respiratory system. You're really, really dancing on the razor's edge here.
Wow. Now, Joe, when Michael Jackson was transported to the hospital, there is some discussion over the condition of his body at that time, but he was declared dead at 2:26 p.m. So to get that timeline down, 10:40 propofol is administered. At 11:50, Conrad Murray says he notices Michael's not breathing. 11:51, call for help. And it leads to his passing. Now, I want to go to something, and I asked you about this because the first paramedic on scene made a number of comments about what transpired when they got there, because using propofol at this stage is weird, beyond the pale, not something anybody's seen before. And the paramedics are not even aware that's what it is. They don't know what they're walking into. A 50-year-old man in the Holmby Hills in Southern California. They're thinking cardiac arrest too, I'm sure. And when they get there, they find out that this is not what they expected. It's Michael Jackson. And by the way, they asked Conrad Murray, how long has this been going on? I want to make sure I get this right because, dude, the paramedics, they don't believe what Conrad Murray is telling them, Joe. Dr. Conrad Murray suggested that this had just happened, this medical event had just transpired. They arrived 15 minutes after the 911 call, Joe. And if it just happened, that means that this just transpired with a medical doctor on site.
Yeah.
And paramedics aren't buying it, and actually said, for the record, I immediately asked him some information. This is the paramedic speaking. I immediately asked him some information. What happened? How long has this been going on? And he told me that it just happened. This was a patient to me that it seemed that he had not just passed away. You realize what he's saying here? Michael Jackson was dead at the home.
Yeah.
They transported a dead body. Is that common practice, Joe?
It is to a certain degree. I've always been fascinated by this dynamic that happens in emergency medicine, and I've seen it played out. You see it play out with children many times.
Mm-hmm.
God bless our paramedics, but sometimes, when you, for instance, they're not immune to this. So if you have a child at the scene and the child is gone, you'll still see them run what's called a code.
Mm-hmm.
And, they're talking about ACLS, a protocol here, which is the top level of life-saving. All right. And so if you work in an emergency room, ICU, if you're an ER physician, ER nurse, you have to be ACLS certified. All right. And it's a rather rigorous program to go through. And they understand what meds to administer, when to try to stimulate the heart, all these sorts of things, because it's very complex. And when they would have seen him, at that
Mm-hmm.
moment in time, they would have noted that he may have been cold to the touch, but we're talking about Michael Jackson.
Right.
So they're going to go through as many heroic measures as they possibly can to try to bring him back, if they can, to pull him away from the edge. But at that point in time, he may have already been over the edge. His, the thing about it is that his pupils were fixed and dilated and completely unresponsive at all. So, one of the things we look for in this, the 7 cardinal signs of death. We need to do a whole episode on 7 cardinal signs.
We do, Joe.
But
That's
the 7 cardinal signs, one of the things we look for is non-reactive pupils. All right. And medical personnel know this anyway, but when we're trying to assess death as death investigators, I always want to make sure that the person I'm standing over is in fact dead, because there are stories and there are cases out there where the person was in fact not dead. So that's one of the 7 cardinal signs of death. And so his pupils are fixed and dilated. He's non-responsive. They probably did a sternal rub on him, everything else, any kind of stimulus they could to get him to react, but yet it was to no avail. Mm-hmm. So they start to run this code. They're going through the protocols. They're pushing medications. They're trying as many heroic measures as they can. But by the time he's gotten into the emergency room, he was essentially pronounced dead. I think at like it's 1426 hours on the 25th. I think. 25th,
yeah.
Or 26th.
26th.
He was deceased at that moment in time. There was nothing else they could do for him. Yeah. And as from my perspective, you look at it, it's like, yeah, no kidding. There's nothing you could have done for him, because the medications, because as tiny as he was, all right, if you took those medications and applied those to me, I'd be a dead man. I mean, I really would. Mm-hmm. But, with this resistance that's built up, one of the remarks that I was really shocked by, the anesthesiologist actually mentions this in their consult. They talk about that there are vials, Dave, of Propofol. They're around the room.
Yeah.
They're there, like there, physically there, and just lying about, that could be drawn up. And I know one of the big questions that people have is probably, well, how was this administered?
Right.
Was this given as a direct injection?
And Joe,
You
I
know,
got to ask you because I did
yeah,
not realize this was a thing until I started prepping this. I didn't
yeah,
realize that people thought, and that there is a real theory that Michael Jackson could have administered propofol to
mhm,
himself,
yeah,
and that is what led to his death. You
yeah.
can dispel that, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, I can very easily. As a matter of fact, he had an indwelling port that had been placed, an IV port that was placed in his lower left leg. Okay, so just imagine this. Remember how you gave a great
Yep.
description earlier talking about propofol, right?
Yep.
When it's administered, you couldn't get to
One, two. I couldn't make it
to
to
what
97.
to 97, starting at 100,
100,
right? Yeah.
99, 98.
I think I got you beat last time I did 95. All
Oh,
right.
wow.
So
Good
we'll
for
have
you.
to check on one another in the future. But anyway, so what it would have if this was self-administered, what this would have required for him to do is first draw up the medication, right? And he's got to check it, right? And then bend forward in the bed, seek out this port that's on his left leg, hit center mass on this port, push the drug, all right, and then he would essentially fall back and go to sleep, right?
Right.
That's what you would think would happen. But you take that, even more evidence of the fact he couldn't do it. If you've got these numbers of benzos in your system,
Mhm.
I'll put it to you this way: would you want to give him a set of car keys
Oh my
with
gosh.
those benzos that he had in his system? No. I mean, he might not can sleep, but I guarantee you his gait is certainly not going to be steady. If
Oh
he's,
my.
everything is kind of this, you know, it's not, he's not hallucinating, but he's in this kind of weird state, in his
Mhm.
brain. Motor functions are slowed down significantly. And this is kind of a delicate thing that you have to do. First off, you're having to take the measurement on the dosage that you're going to apply to yourself, and then hit this spot where someone has set up an IV in his leg. I don't think Michael Jackson, maybe I'm missing something. I don't think that he had ever set up an IV before, site, in his leg, which, by the by, just so folks understand, this is one of the most difficult spots to start an IV. It takes work in order to do it. It's not like doing it, in the arm or the back
Mhm.
of the hand or the crook of the arm, the antecubital fossa. It's not like that. The leg is much more difficult, in my opinion. And I don't think he did that, Dave. That this goes to, because, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
this is a homicide.
Right. Yeah.
This is a
It is.
homicide case. And so every bit of this has evidentiary value, right?
And I'm
The
glad you brought that
steps.
up. I'm
Yeah.
glad you said that because it is a homicide. The one thing that pains me now is the final comment from the paramedic who was talking about, that this was a patient to me that it seemed that he had not just passed away, that some
Yeah.
time had gone before we were notified. That's frustrating part number 1. Part number 2 is what the paramedics live with to this day, Joe. Reflecting on this call, this is a quote. Reflecting on this call and the days, the weeks, the months afterwards, one of the greatest regrets that all of us
Mm.
had was that we had not been called sooner.
Yeah. Yeah. You know why they weren't called sooner? In my humble opinion, um, Conrad knew he was doing wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure that he went into panic mode, because this runs contrary to everything that he should have been taught as a physician. Or maybe he was taught, and maybe the fact that he's now in this orbit, this celebrity orbit, and he's willing to facilitate anything for Michael Jackson, a 50-year-old man. He's willing to do it because it's Michael Jackson, right?
Yeah.
He knew better. And I think that probably panic set in. Maybe he tried to do the heroics all on his own, thinking that somehow he could pull him back from the edge. And by the time paramedics rolled in, Dave, it was just, it was too late.
Right.
It was too late. You know, the thing about it is that with this physician administering these medications, um, the meds become weaponized. Now, whether or not he has intent or not is, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't have to prove motive on
Right.
any level. It's the fact that you took these steps. And I think tell me what he's convicted of again, or was convicted of.
Remember, this happens, Michael Jackson dies June 26th of 2009. Dr. Conrad Murray was charged and was convicted by a jury of involuntary manslaughter on November 7th, 2011. The maximum possible sentence for involuntary manslaughter, 4 years in the county jail in Los Angeles. Conrad Murray, Dr. Murray, served 1 year, 11 months of that sentence due to good behavior. He was released. His, oh, by the way, while he was in the jail, and we have talked about that jail cell a lot in the last, weeks on other shows, Joe, because of the individuals who are being kept there at the Metropolitan Jail in Los Angeles. Not a great place, but for Dr. Conrad Murray, Joe, he was kept in a solo cell. He had his own TV, and he had his own cell phone the entire time he was in jail. 1 year and 11 months later, he gets released. He never gets his doctor's license, his medical license to practice in California, Texas, or Nevada.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. He goes to his home country, Trinidad and Tobago, gets his medical license. I don't know if he had one there before, but he has one now, and he opened up a medical clinic.
Wow.
Yeah.
So if you're vacationing, by the way,
DCM Medical Clinic, or Medical Institute, rather, DCM Medical Institute, Trinidad and Tobago. Dr.
I can't
Conrad
urge
Murray.
you strongly enough to be aware. All right. But yeah, I mean, and this is a very sad chapter. It's a sad chapter in the sense that, we think we know celebrities. We think we know their lives because of the things that we see, them demonstrating out in public. And you really don't. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes because, after all, it is entertainment, right? There is kind of a false front, like when you walk onto a Hollywood studio. You go through and there are all these towns that they've created, storefronts, if you will, but there's nothing behind it. It's kind of vacuous. Michael Jackson had an amazing life relative to the music that he created and the way he entertained us. But just because you see something that is portrayed, maybe in your mind as heroic on the outside, doesn't mean that there's not darkness indwelling behind the scenes.
I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.